On a sunlit afternoon in June 1997, the Harper family's blue Chevy Suburban disappeared from the quiet streets of Savannah, Georgia. Security footage captured them stopping at a roadside diner in Macon, where cameras recorded Richard, Elizabeth, and their two children smiling as they ordered pie. By nightfall, all four vanished without a trace. 25 years later, the discovery of a mud-caked vehicle in the murky depths of the Altamaha River would finally reveal what many had suspected but feared to admit. This wasn't a family that simply drove away to start a new life. This was a calculated act that would shake a Georgia community to its core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Summer in Savannah, Georgia in 1997 arrived with its characteristic heavy heat. The air hung thick with humidity, Spanish moss swaying gently in the occasional breeze that offered little relief from the southern sun. On Magnolia Avenue, a tree-lined residential street with historic homes dating back to the 1800s, the Harper family was preparing for their annual trip to Elizabeth's parents' lakehouse near Atlanta. Richard Harper, 42, was loading fishing gear into their blue 1996 Chevy Suburban. A respected local architect with a reputation for attention to detail, Richard moved methodically, arranging each item with precision in the spacious trunk. His wife Elizabeth, 39, a beloved high school English teacher known for inspiring a love of literature in her students, checked off items on her neatly written packing list. Their children, 14-year-old James and 11-year-old Sarah, argued playfully about which board games to bring for rainy days at the lake. The Harpers were well known in their neighborhood, the kind of family that hosted 4th of July barbecues and volunteered at community events. Their departure that sunny afternoon of June 18, 1997, seemed completely ordinary. Neighbors later recalled waving as the blue Suburban pulled away from the brick colonial house. Richard at the wheel, Elizabeth in the passenger seat, both children visible in the back. Sarah's blonde ponytail bouncing as she turned to wave goodbye. The family's plan was straightforward. Drive north toward Atlanta, staying overnight in Macon at a hotel they'd booked in advance. Richard had meetings scheduled there the following morning before they would continue to the lakehouse for their 2-week vacation. It was a drive they'd made countless times before, following Interstate 16 northwest from Savannah. At approximately 2:15 p.m., traffic cameras captured the Harpers' Suburban passing through the outskirts of Savannah. At 4:30 p.m., they stopped at a gas station in Vidalia. Security footage showed Richard filling the tank while Elizabeth went inside to pay. The children remained in the car, James with headphones on, Sarah reading a book. Nothing in their behavior suggested any concern or deviation from their plans. Their last confirmed sighting came at 6:45 p.m. when they stopped at Ruby's Diner on the outskirts of Macon. The restaurant's grainy security footage showed the family seated in a corner booth, sharing dessert. Richard paid with his credit card at 7:28 p.m., leaving a generous tip according to the server's later statement. All four Harpers walked out to their vehicle, which was parked at the edge of the lot, partially visible in the camera's frame. The Suburban's headlights cut through the early summer evening as they pulled onto the road. And then, like a magic trick with no reveal, the Harper family vanished. They never checked into their reserved hotel in Macon. Richard never arrived for his meetings the following morning. The Harpers simply disappeared into the warm Georgia night. The first person to raise the alarm was Elizabeth's mother, Margaret Sullivan. When the family failed to arrive at the lakehouse by midday on June 19th, Margaret called Elizabeth's cell phone repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. Growing increasingly concerned, she phoned the hotel in Macon, only to discover the Harpers had never checked in. By 3 p.m. on June 19th, Margaret was on the phone with the Savannah Police Department, her voice trembling as she reported her entire family missing. "Something's wrong," she insisted to the officer taking the report. Elizabeth would never not call. Never. The initial missing persons report didn't trigger immediate alarm bells. Adults go missing all the time temporarily, the desk sergeant explained gently. Perhaps they had car trouble or decided to stay somewhere else. But Margaret was adamant. This wasn't like her daughter's family. Check Richard's work, she urged. He never misses meetings, never. When Richard's architecture firm confirmed he had failed to show up for important client meetings without any notice, something completely out of character for the meticulous professional, the case gained traction. By the evening of June 19th, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, had been notified, and by the following morning, a formal investigation was underway. The first 48 hours of a missing persons case are critical. Investigators know this better than anyone. As the clock ticked past that crucial window, the atmosphere at the Chatham County Law Enforcement Center grew increasingly tense. Detective Marcus Lawson, a veteran investigator with 15 years of experience, was assigned as lead on the case. His first action was to gather a team in the department's conference room, where large maps of Georgia were spread across the table. We have a family of 4 who vanished somewhere between Ruby's diner in Macon and their hotel 6 miles away, Lawson explained, circling the short stretch of road with a red marker. That's our primary search area. I want every inch of that route covered. Ditches, woods, parking lots, everything. Teams were quickly dispatched. Officers in rain gear walked the shoulders of roads leading from the diner, searching for any sign of a crash or forced departure from the roadway. K9 units were deployed at the diner's parking lot, picking up the Harper family's scent from items Margaret Sullivan had provided from their home. Meanwhile, the technical team traced the Harpers' last known movements. Credit card records confirmed the gas purchase in Vidalia and the meal at Ruby's diner. After that, nothing. No hotel charges, no further gas purchases, no ATM withdrawals. Richard and Elizabeth's cell phones had both gone offline shortly after leaving the diner, their last ping coming from a tower just east of Macon. Security footage from businesses along the route was collected and analyzed. The diner's cameras captured the family leaving, but the quality was poor, the image grainy. The Suburban could be seen turning right out of the parking lot, heading in the direction of their hotel. After that, no cameras along the route captured the distinctive blue vehicle. By June 21st, 3 days into the search, a disturbing reality began to set in. No crashed vehicle had been found. No bodies had been discovered. No evidence of the family's fate had emerged, despite intensive searching. It was as if the Harpers and their Suburban had simply evaporated from the face of the earth. In the Investigation Command Center, a grim Detective Lawson updated his team. We've covered every inch of that road. No crash site, no vehicle, no evidence of 4 people walking away. Something else happened here. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. What had initially been treated as a possible accident was shifting toward something potentially more sinister. The investigation expanded in new directions. The Harpers' personal lives were examined in detail. Financial records were scrutinized. Interviews with friends, colleagues, and neighbors revealed no obvious problems. No large debts, no marital issues, no professional troubles. The picture that emerged was of a stable, happy family looking forward to their vacation. But one name began to surface repeatedly in these interviews: Michael Lawton. Lawton, 45, lived 5 houses down from the Harpers on Magnolia Avenue. A general contractor who had been struggling financially, Lawton had done renovation work on the Harpers' home the previous year. Several neighbors mentioned an argument between Richard Harper and Lawton that had occurred in April, approximately 2 months before the family's disappearance. The dispute had been loud enough to draw attention, with Richard allegedly telling Lawton to stay away from my family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Detective Lawson added Lawton to the list of persons of interest and scheduled an interview. On June 23rd, Lawton arrived at the station, unshaven and visibly nervous. He admitted to the argument with Richard Harper, but downplayed its significance. It was just a business disagreement, Lawton explained. I did some work on their bathroom, and Richard claimed I overcharged him. We worked it out. When pressed about his whereabouts on June 18th, Lawton claimed he had been working on a job site in Savannah all day, then went home alone. I didn't go anywhere near Macon, he insisted. I was home watching TV all night. The problem was, no one could verify Lawton's alibi. The job site he claimed to be working at had been closed that day due to material delivery issues, according to the foreman. And Lawton lived alone, with no one to confirm he had stayed home that evening. Further investigation revealed that Lawton had borrowed $20,000 from Richard Harper the previous year for a business investment that had failed. According to bank records, Harper had recently been pressing for repayment, with a formal request letter sent just 10 days before the family's disappearance. This information shifted the investigation's focus squarely onto Lawton. Search warrants were obtained for his home and vehicle. His pickup truck, a black Ford F-150, was thoroughly examined by forensic teams. No evidence linking him to the Harpers' disappearance was found. No blood, no fibers from their clothing, nothing suspicious. His cell phone records showed no movement toward Macon on the day in question. Without physical evidence connecting Lawton to the disappearance, the investigation hit a wall. He remained a person of interest, but could not be charged based on circumstantial evidence alone. The case file noted Michael Lawton had financial motive and possible personal conflict with Richard Harper. However, no physical evidence exists connecting him to the disappearance. Insufficient grounds for arrest. By early July 1997, media interest in the case had peaked. The mysterious vanishing of an entire family captured national attention. The Harpers' photos appeared on morning shows and cable news networks. Their story was featured on America's Most Wanted. Theories proliferated, from voluntary disappearance to alien abduction, from accident to murder. Through it all, Elizabeth's mother, Margaret Sullivan, remained a fierce advocate, refusing to let public interest wane. My daughter and her family did not just drive off into thin air, she told reporters during a press conference 1 month after the disappearance. Something happened to them and someone knows what it is. As summer turned to fall, the active investigation gradually slowed. Leads were exhausted. Tips that poured in from across the country led nowhere. The Harpers' case file grew thick with interviews, reports, and dead ends, but no answers emerged. In December 1997, 6 months after the disappearance, the GBI officially classified the Harper family case as cold, still open, but no longer actively investigated. Resources were redirected to newer cases with fresher leads. For the investigators who had poured their hearts into the search, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Detective Lawson, in his final entry in the case log, wrote, "I believe the Harper family met with foul play on the evening of June 18, 1997. The perpetrator had knowledge of their movements and likely had a personal motive. Without recovery of the vehicle or remains, this case may never be solved." The years that followed saw the Harper case fade from public consciousness. New tragedies captured headlines. New mysteries demanded attention. But in Savannah, particularly on Magnolia Avenue, the memory of the family that vanished persisted like a ghost story told in hushed tones. Margaret Sullivan refused to let her daughter's family be forgotten. Each June 18th, she organized a candlelight vigil in Forsyth Park. The first year, hundreds attended. By the 5th anniversary, the crowd had dwindled to a few dozen. But Margaret persisted, standing strong despite her advancing years, holding her candle and her daughter's photograph. Michael Lawton remained in the neighborhood until 2001, when he sold his house and moved to Florida. Neighbors reported that he seemed relieved to leave, as though escaping the whispers and sidelong glances that had followed him for 4 years. He told people he was starting fresh, heading to Tampa for new business opportunities. Detective Lawson retired from the Savannah Police Department in 2005, but kept a copy of the Harper file. Colleagues said he would review it periodically, still searching for the missing piece that might crack the case wide open. "Some cases just get under your skin," he told a rookie detective once. "You carry them with you. The case might have remained cold forever were it not for a group of college students from Georgia Southern University. In 2017, 20 years after the disappearance, 4 environmental science majors formed a project team focused on mapping underwater pollution in Georgia's rivers using advanced sonar technology. The Altamaha River, which flows from central Georgia to the Atlantic Ocean, was their primary research area. On October 12, 2017, the students were scanning a deep section of the river approximately 15 miles east of Macon. Their equipment detected a large metallic object resting on the riverbed in about 30 feet of water. Initially, they assumed it was industrial waste, perhaps an old refrigerator or washing machine dumped illegally. "Let's mark it for the EPA report," suggested team leader Lisa Chen, noting the GPS coordinates. But the object's shape on the sonar display caught her attention. "That's not a refrigerator," she said slowly. "That looks like a vehicle." The students reported their finding to local authorities, who initially showed little interest. Abandoned vehicles in rivers weren't uncommon, and recovery was expensive. But when Chen mentioned the location, just off a bridge on a secondary road that connected to the route from Ruby's Diner to the Harper's intended hotel, Detective James Martinez of the GBI felt a chill run down his spine. Martinez, who had joined the Bureau years after the Harper case went cold, was familiar with the unsolved mystery. He immediately pulled the old file and compared the sonar location to the likely route the family would have. Taken that night in 1997, the secondary road would have been a reasonable alternative to the main highway if there had been traffic or construction. On November 3, 2017, a specialized recovery team assembled at the site identified by the students. Diverse descended into the murky waters of the Altamaha, visibility limited to just a few feet. The river bottom was a tangle of fallen trees, mud, and debris accumulated over decades. After nearly 3 hours of methodical searching, a diver's flashlight illuminated what appeared to be a vehicle's roof, almost completely buried in silt and river detritus. Further exploration confirmed it was a large SUV, positioned upside down, its wheels pointing toward the surface. "We've got a vehicle," the dive team leader reported over the radio. "Can't confirm make or model yet. It's been down here a long time." The recovery operation was painstaking. Heavy chains were carefully secured around the vehicle's frame. As the specialized crane on the riverbank slowly raised the SUV from its watery grave, water cascaded from the windows and doors. 2 decades of river mud had coated every surface, obscuring its color and features. When the vehicle was finally placed on the riverbank, an expectant hush fell over the recovery team. The license plate was caked in mud, but after careful cleaning, the numbers emerged. Georgia plate HDL 437. A quick check confirmed what many already suspected. It belonged to the Harper family's 1996 Chevy Suburban. Inside the vehicle, partially preserved by the mud and cold water, were the remains of 4 individuals. The position of the bodies suggested they had been in their seats when the vehicle entered the water. Richard behind the wheel, Elizabeth beside him, the children in the back. For Detective Martinez, the discovery brought mixed emotions. Finding them answers the question of what happened in the most basic sense, he told reporters later. But it opens up many more questions about how and why they ended up in that river. The vehicle was transported to the GBI's forensic laboratory in Atlanta, where a team of specialists began the meticulous process of examining every inch for evidence that might have survived 2 decades underwater. The medical examiner faced the challenging task of determining cause of death from remains in advanced decomposition. The initial findings were disturbing. The Suburban's front windshield was intact, with no signs of impact damage that would indicate an accidental crash into the river. More tellingly, all 4 doors were locked from the outside, a detail that eliminated any possibility of the family escaping if they had been conscious when the vehicle entered the water. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that the Suburban's brake lines had been cleanly cut, not damaged in a crash or deteriorated over time, but deliberately severed with a cutting tool. This wasn't an accident. Someone had ensured the Harper family would be unable to stop their vehicle once they started down the steep road approaching the river bridge. The medical examiner's report, completed 3 weeks after the recovery, confirmed drowning as the cause of death for all 4 family members. There were no signs of other injuries that would have incapacitated them before entering the water, suggesting they had been alive and likely conscious when the Suburban plunged off the bridge. News of the discovery spread rapidly through Georgia. Headlines announced, "Harper family found after 20 years," and foul play suspected in long-missing family case. The community that had slowly healed from the mysterious disappearance was forced to confront a far more horrific reality. The family hadn't simply vanished. They had been murdered. For Margaret Sullivan, now in her 80s, the news brought the closure she had sought for 2 decades, but also unbearable pain. "I always knew they didn't just leave," she told a reporter, her voice breaking. "But knowing how they died, that they suffered, it's almost too much to bear." The focus of the investigation immediately returned to Michael Lawton. GBI agents began the process of tracking down the former neighbor who had owed Richard Harper money and had no alibi for the night of the disappearance. What they discovered was that Lawton's life after leaving Savannah had been far from successful. The business opportunities in Tampa had failed within a year. He had moved frequently, leaving behind unpaid debts and angry associates. By 2020, GBI agents traced Michael Lawton to a small rental house in Pensacola, Florida. Once a successful contractor, the man who answered the door was gaunt, unshaven, with bloodshot eyes that darted nervously. At 68, Lawton looked 2 decades older, his hands trembling as he invited the agents inside his sparse living room. "I figured you'd come eventually," Lawton said quietly, "after they found the car." The confession that followed stunned even the veteran agents. Lawton described in detail how he had tampered with the Harper's Suburban while it was parked in their driveway the night before they left. He had crawled underneath, carefully cutting the brake lines just enough that they would fail after several hours of driving and multiple brake applications. "I knew their route," he admitted. "Knew they'd be coming down that hill to the bridge. Without brakes at that speed." His voice trailed off, eyes fixed on something distant only he could see. When asked why, Lawton's answer was simple yet chilling. "The money. Richard was going to take me to court over that loan. I was going to lose everything. My business, my reputation. I just wanted him gone. I never meant for the whole family." Again, his voice faded, but the agents noted there were no tears, no genuine remorse, just a hollow acknowledgement of facts. The arrest of Michael Lawton made national headlines. In Savannah, the community that had wondered for decades about the fate of the Harper family was stunned to learn that the answer had been living among them all along. Neighbors who had casually greeted Lawton at grocery stores and gas stations struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the calculated killer he had proven to be. "He seemed so normal," one former neighbor told reporters. "Just a guy having financial troubles. We never imagined he could do something so horrific." For Detective Martinez, who had inherited the cold case and seen it through to resolution, the arrest brought mixed emotions. "Justice delayed is better than justice denied," he said during a press conference. But knowing that Lawton lived free for over 20 years, while the Harper family lay at the bottom of that river, it's hard to accept. The evidence against Lawton was overwhelming. His detailed confession matched forensic findings from the recovered vehicle. Tools found in his Florida home matched the cuts made to the brake lines. Cell phone records from 1997, re-examined with modern technology, placed him near the bridge on the night of the disappearance, contradicting his original alibi. In January 2021, Michael Lawton stood trial in Macon for the murders of Richard Elizabeth James and Sarah Harper. The courtroom was packed each day, with many attendees wearing blue ribbons, the color of the Suburban that had carried the family to their deaths. Margaret Sullivan, now 86, attended every day of the proceedings, supported by her remaining family members. Her face, lined with decades of grief, remained stoic as prosecutors detailed the calculated nature of Lawton's actions. Only when photographs of her daughter and grandchildren were shown did she quietly dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. The trial lasted just 9 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict: guilty on all counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Lawton to 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Lawton showed no reaction, his face as empty as it had been throughout the proceedings. Outside the courthouse, Margaret Sullivan spoke briefly to reporters. 23 years ago, I lost my daughter, my son-in-law, and my precious grandchildren. Nothing can bring them back. But today, the man who took them from us will finally face consequences for what he did. Her voice, though frail with age, carried the strength that had sustained her through decades of uncertainty and grief. The Harper case, once one of Georgia's most perplexing mysteries, was officially closed. But its impact continued to ripple through the state's law enforcement community. In March 2021, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation established the Harper Initiative, a program dedicated to reviewing and reinvestigating cold cases using advanced technology and forensic techniques. The program's logo, a stylized blue Suburban, served as a reminder that no case was ever truly beyond solving. For the GBI agents who had worked the case, the Harper family's story became both a cautionary tale and a source of motivation. "We learned 2 things from cases like this," Detective Martinez explained to a class of new recruits. "First, that evil can hide behind ordinary facades. And second, that persistence matters. 23 years is a long time, but the truth was waiting to be found." The environmental science students, whose sonar project had led to the discovery of the Suburban, were honored by both the GBI and the state of Georgia. Lisa Chen, the team leader who had recognized the vehicle's shape on the sonar display, went on to join the GBI's forensic division, specializing in underwater recovery operations. "Sometimes the most important discoveries happen by accident," Chen told a reporter years later. "We were looking for pollution, but we found closure for a family that had been waiting for decades. It changed how I think about science and its purpose." The bridge over the Altamaha River, where the Harper family's vehicle had plunged into the water, was eventually renamed Harper Memorial Bridge. A small stone monument was erected nearby, bearing the names and photographs of Richard, Elizabeth, James, and Sarah beneath their images. A simple inscription read, "May their memory remind us that truth, though long buried, will always find its way to the light." Margaret Sullivan visited the memorial frequently in her remaining years. Sometimes she brought flowers or small mementos. More often, she simply sat on the nearby bench, gazing at the river that had held her family's secret for so long. "I talk to them here," she confided to Detective Martinez during one such visit. "I feel closer to them knowing this is where they were last together." It sounds strange, but there's peace in knowing, even when the knowledge brings pain. In schools across Georgia, the Harper case became a teaching tool. Law enforcement officers visited classrooms, sharing age-appropriate versions of the story to illustrate the importance of forensic science, witness testimony, and technological advances in solving crimes. Sarah Blackwood, a forensic anthropologist who had helped identify the remains found in the Suburban, developed a special curriculum for high school students interested in forensic careers. "The Harper case demonstrates how science serves justice," she explained. "Even after 2 decades underwater, that vehicle and its contents still held the evidence needed to solve the case." The house on Magnolia Avenue, where the Harper family had lived, stood empty for years after their disappearance. Neighbors reported strange noises and lights, fueling rumors that the property was haunted by the family's spirits. Eventually, in 2010, the house was purchased by a young couple from Atlanta who renovated it completely, erasing the physical reminders of the family who had once called it home. But on the anniversary of the Harpers' disappearance each June, neighbors still placed 4 candles, on the sidewalk in front of the house, one for each family member. The tradition continued even after Lawton's conviction, a quiet acknowledgement of lives cut short and a community forever changed. Michael Lawton's own house, 5 doors down, had cycled through multiple owners over the years. None stayed long, inevitably learning the property's connection to the case. By 2023, the house had been demolished, replaced by a small community garden where neighborhood children planted flowers and vegetables. The transformation seemed fitting, new life and growth where darkness had once resided. For journalists who had covered the Harper case from its beginning, the resolution brought a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal reflection. Diane Maxwell, a reporter who had been fresh out of college when the family disappeared, wrote a powerful retrospective for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution after Lawton's conviction. In June 1997, when the Harpers vanished, we wrote about a mystery, Maxwell's article began. In 2021, we write about a tragedy with answers. The space between those two stories spans nearly a quarter century, reminding us that time may obscure truth, but rarely erases it completely. The article went on to examine how the case had changed over the decades, from active investigation to cold case to eventual resolution, and how advances in technology had played a crucial role in that journey. Maxwell interviewed the original investigators, the student researchers who found the vehicle, and the modern forensic team that extracted evidence from the long-submerged Suburban. "What strikes me most," wrote Detective Lawson, now retired and in his 70s, "is how close we came to solving this case in 1997. We had the right suspect, the right motive. What we lacked was the physical evidence that modern technology finally provided. I wonder how many other cases are waiting for similar breakthroughs." The piece concluded with reflections from those who had known the Harper family, painting a portrait not just of victims, but of lives well lived until their abrupt end. Elizabeth's former students, now adults with children of their own, shared memories of her passionate teaching style. Richard's architectural colleagues described buildings around Savannah that still bore his creative imprint. Friends of the children spoke of James's talent for drawing and Sarah's contagious laugh. "The Harper family is more than a solved case," Maxwell wrote in her closing paragraph. "They are a reminder that behind every crime statistic are real people whose absence leaves holes in the fabric of communities. Their story deserves to be remembered not just for how they died, but for how they lived." The article won Maxwell a Pulitzer Prize for feature writing and was later expanded into a book titled 23 Years of Silence, which became a national bestseller and was eventually adapted into a documentary film. The film, produced by an independent studio and released in 2024, took a unique approach to storytelling. Rather than focusing solely on the investigation and eventual solving of the case, the documentary explored the ripple effects of the Harper family's disappearance through the community of Savannah. The filmmakers interviewed dozens of people whose lives had intersected with the Harpers, from Elizabeth's students to Richard's clients, from the detectives who had worked the case to the neighbors who had placed candles outside the family home year after year. Through these conversations, a portrait emerged of a community forever altered by both loss and uncertainty. One particularly powerful segment featured interviews with the Harper children's former classmates, now in their 30s and 40s, with families of their own. Many spoke of how the disappearance had shaped their worldview, making them more protective of their own children, more aware of life's fragility. "When your friends vanish without explanation, it changes how you see the world," explained one woman who had been in Sarah's 6th grade class. "For years, we all jumped at unexpected sounds, worried when parents were late picking us up. The not knowing was almost worse than grief." The documentary also examined how the case had influenced Georgia's approach to missing persons investigations. Following the Harper disappearance, the state had implemented new protocols for handling cases involving entire families. recognizing that such disappearances often indicated foul play rather than voluntary absence. Before the Harper case, there was a tendency to assume that families who disappeared together had chosen to leave, explained a current GBI administrator. Now we approach these cases with much more urgency, understanding that time is critical and the entire family may be at risk. The film concluded with footage from the memorial service held after the Harper family's remains were finally recovered from the river. Hundreds of people gathered at a church in Savannah, many bringing photographs and mementos of the family. Margaret Sullivan, seated in the front row, appeared both fragile and resolute as she listened to speakers share memories of her loved ones. The final scene showed Margaret at the Harper Memorial Bridge at sunset, placing 4 white roses on the stone monument before slowly walking away. The camera lingered on the memorial as darkness fell, a lone street lamp illuminating the family's photographs. The documentary won several awards and sparked renewed interest in cold cases nationwide. Law enforcement agencies reported increases in tips and information related to long-dormant investigations, evidence that the Harper story had reminded the public that no case is ever truly beyond solving. In Savannah, the impact of the case's resolution was particularly profound. The city had lived with the mystery for so long that its resolution required a collective adjustment of understanding. Community forums and discussion groups formed to process the revelations about Lawton and his calculated crime. We all need to recognize that we lived alongside evil without recognizing it, one longtime resident said during a community meeting. That's a difficult truth to accept. Mental health professionals noted an increase in residents seeking therapy related to delayed grief and trauma associated with the case. Dr. Eleanor Patel, a psychologist who specialized in trauma, explained the phenomenon. When a mystery is solved after so many years, it can reactivate grief that people thought they had processed. Suddenly, they're confronted with the concrete reality of what happened, and it can be overwhelming. For younger Savannah residents who had grown up hearing about the Harper family as an urban legend or cautionary tale, the case's resolution brought the story into sharp, historical focus. Schools developed special curriculum units about the case, using it to teach not just forensic science, but also media literacy, community responsibility, and the importance of bearing witness to tragedy. We're careful to approach the topic with sensitivity, explained one high school principal. But we also recognize that this is part of our community's history, and there are important lessons to be learned about persistence, justice, and how we remember those we've lost. The Savannah Historical Society created an exhibit titled 23 Years, The Search for the Harper Family, featuring original news clippings, investigation materials released by the GBI, and personal items donated by Margaret Sullivan. The exhibit became one of the Society's most visited installations, drawing visitors from across the country. People are drawn to resolution, the Society's curator explained. This case lingered in our collective consciousness for so long as an open question. Now that we have answers, there's a desire to understand the full story, to see how all the pieces finally came together. For the law enforcement officers who had worked on the case over the decades, the resolution brought both professional satisfaction and emotional closure. Many attended Lawton's sentencing hearing, watching as the man who had eluded them for so long finally faced justice. Detective Lawson, who had carried a copy of the case file into retirement, attended despite his advancing age and health challenges. After the sentencing, he approached Margaret Sullivan and simply held her hand in silence for several long moments. No words were needed between two people who had, in their different ways, never forgotten the Harper family. "It's strange," Lawson said later. "For 23 years, this case was a weight I carried. Now that it's solved, I feel both lighter and somehow emptier. When you chase something for so long, its absence leaves a void." That sentiment was echoed by many who had been involved in the investigation. Detective Martinez, who had seen the case through to its resolution, found himself at something of a professional crossroads after Lawton's conviction. "This case consumed me for years," he admitted. "It became the defining investigation of my career. Now I have to figure out what comes next, how to channel that same determination into new challenges." Martinez ultimately found his answer in education, accepting a position at the Georgia Criminal Justice Academy, where he taught advanced investigative techniques to new generations of law enforcement officers. His classes always included a detailed study of the Harper case, examining both the initial investigative missteps and the technological advances that eventually led to its resolution. "The Harper case teaches us humility," Martinez told his students. "It reminds us that what we can't solve today may be solvable tomorrow, and that our job is to preserve evidence and information for that future possibility." The technological aspects of the case's resolution became a particular focus of study. The sonar equipment that had identified the submerged Suburban was now standard issue for environmental research teams throughout Georgia, with protocols in place for reporting suspicious findings to law enforcement. Forensic techniques for extracting evidence from long-submerged vehicles were refined based on the Harper case experience. Specialists studied how certain materials had preserved while others degraded, developing new approaches to underwater crime scenes that would influence investigations nationwide. The case also sparked advancements in cold case review methodologies. The GBI developed a systematic approach to re-evaluating dormant investigations, incorporating regular technology updates and periodic fresh eyes reviews. This approach, known as the Harper Protocol, was adopted by law enforcement agencies across the country. "We can't change what happened to the Harper family," explained the GBI director during a national law enforcement conference. "But we can honor their memory by ensuring that their case continues to advance how we approach long unsolved crimes." For the Georgia Southern University students whose research project had led to the discovery of the Suburban, the experience had profound career impacts. All four pursued paths related to forensic science or criminal justice, citing the Harper case as their inspiration. Lisa Chen, who had recognized the vehicle shape on the sonar display, spoke frequently at educational events about the importance of cross-disciplinary awareness. "As environmental scientists, we weren't looking for a missing family," she explained to a group of college students. "But because we recognized what we were seeing and reported it properly, justice was finally possible. It taught me that expertise in one field can unexpectedly serve justice in another." The technology company that had manufactured the sonar equipment used by the students developed an enhanced version specifically designed for underwater searches. The new system, capable of creating clearer images of submerged objects, was donated to law enforcement agencies across Georgia, with the first unit given to the GBI's newly formed underwater recovery team. The Harper case demonstrated how technology can bridge decades of uncertainty, the company's CEO explained during the donation ceremony. "We're committed to ensuring that other families don't have to wait 23 years for answers." The legal proceedings against Michael Lawton continued to generate headlines long after his initial conviction. His defense team filed multiple appeals, challenging everything from the admissibility of his confession to the forensic analysis of the brake lines. Each appeal was systematically rejected, with judges citing the overwhelming evidence of Lawton's guilt. During one appeal hearing, Lawton finally spoke publicly about his crime. In a monotone voice that chilled those present, he described how he had followed the Harper family's Suburban on that June evening in 1997, watching from a distance as they stopped at Ruby's Diner, waiting on a nearby side road for them to continue their journey. "I needed to be sure," he explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "I needed to see it happen, to know that my problem with Richard was really over." The testimony from Lawton sent waves of horror through the courtroom. His cold description of watching the Harper family's vehicle plunge into the river, of hearing the distant splash and seeing the headlights disappear beneath the water's surface, then simply driving away, left even seasoned law enforcement officers shaken. Margaret Sullivan, who had attended every hearing despite her advanced age, collapsed upon hearing these details and had to be helped from the courtroom by family members. The medical team on site treated her for shock, and she was unable to return for the remainder of the day's proceedings. For Detective Martinez, Lawton's testimony confirmed what the evidence had suggested, but what had been difficult to fully comprehend: the calculated nature of the crime, the complete lack of empathy for an entire family, including 2 children who had never done him any harm. "In 20 years of law enforcement, I've encountered many criminals," Martinez later wrote in his memoir, "but few have chilled me like Michael Lawton, not because he was exceptionally violent or depraved, but because his evil was so ordinary, so mundane. He eliminated a family over a financial dispute with the same emotional investment most people give to paying a utility bill. The appeals process dragged on for years, with each rejection bringing temporary closure to those connected to the case, only for another appeal to reopen wounds. By 2025, Lawton had exhausted all legal avenues. His conviction stood, his 4 consecutive life sentences confirmed by every level of the judicial system. Throughout these proceedings, journalists continued to explore the case from new angles. One investigative reporter discovered that Lawton had a history of suspicious activities predating the Harper murders. Former business associates came forward with stories of threatening behavior, fraudulent practices, and unexplained accidents that had benefited Lawton financially. The Harper case wasn't Lawton's first crime, concluded an exposé published in The Atlantic. It was simply the first one for which he was caught. His entire adult life appears to have been built on escalating patterns of fraud, intimidation, and violence that went undetected or unreported for decades. This reporting prompted law enforcement in Florida and Georgia to re-examine several unsolved cases from areas where Lawton had lived. While no direct connections were established, the possibility remained that the man who had so carefully planned and executed the Harper family murders might have other victims. For the communities that had been touched by the Harper case, these revelations brought a complicated mixture of vindication and horror. The justice that had finally arrived for the Harper family was tempered by the knowledge that earlier intervention might have prevented their deaths. "We have to ask ourselves difficult questions," said a Savannah City Council member during a public forum on community safety. "How did a man like Lawton live among us without raising serious alarms? What warning signs did we miss? And most importantly, what are we doing differently now?" These questions sparked meaningful changes in community awareness and reporting systems. Savannah implemented a neighborhood watch program specifically focused on identifying patterns of concerning behavior before they escalated to violence. The program, named Harper Watch in memory of the family, trained community members to recognize and report situations where financial disputes or personal conflicts showed signs of dangerous escalation. "We're not asking people to spy on their neighbors," explained the program's director. "We're asking them to care enough to speak up when something doesn't seem right." The Harper tragedy might have been prevented if someone had recognized how dangerous Lawton's financial desperation and resentment had become. The program proved surprisingly effective. Within its first 2 years, Harper Watch reports led to interventions in dozens of situations where conflicts had the potential to turn violent. While it was impossible to know how many tragedies were prevented, the community embraced the approach as a living memorial to the family they had lost. Education about the case extended beyond law enforcement and into Georgia's school system. A carefully developed curriculum for high school students used the Harper case to explore multiple academic disciplines: forensic science, psychology, ethics, and civic responsibility. We want students to understand that solving crimes isn't just about technology and evidence, explained the curriculum's lead developer. It's about community members making choices, to pay attention, to report concerns, to preserve information that might later prove crucial. The Harper case illustrates how many people play a role in justice, from the original investigators to the college students whose research project finally located the vehicle. Students who completed the curriculum often expressed profound insights about responsibility and awareness. Before learning about this case, I thought crime solving was something only police did, wrote one high school junior in a reflection essay. Now I understand that everyone has a role in creating a community where justice is possible. The influence of the Harper case extended into Georgia's legislative chambers as well. In 2026, the state passed the Harper Family Justice Act, which allocated significant funding for cold case investigations and established new protocols for cases involving missing families. The legislation received rare bipartisan support, with lawmakers from across the political spectrum recognizing the importance of resolving long unsolved cases. Time should never be the ally of those who commit violent crimes, said the bill's sponsor during debate. This legislation ensures that cases like the Harper disappearance will never again wait 23 years for resolution simply because resources were diverted elsewhere. The Act created a dedicated cold case unit within the GBI, staffed by experienced investigators and equipped with the latest forensic technology. Within its first year of operation, the unit resolved 7 long-dormant cases, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. For the Georgia Southern University Environmental Science Department, the Harper case transformed how they approached their research. The program instituted formal protocols for reporting unusual findings, ensuring that discoveries like the submerged Suburban would be promptly shared with appropriate authorities. We've always taught our students to be observant scientists, said the department chair. Now we also teach them to be aware of how their observations might serve the broader community, particularly in matters of justice and public safety. The university established the Harper Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to students pursuing interdisciplinary studies that connected environmental science with public service. Lisa Chen, whose recognition of the vehicle shape on sonar had been the crucial link in solving the case, returned to campus each year to present the scholarship to its recipients. Science doesn't exist in isolation from society, Chen told students during one such ceremony. The data we collect, the patterns we recognize, these have human implications that can extend far beyond our immediate research questions. The Harper case taught me that a seemingly routine river scan can change lives and bring justice. For the GBI forensic team that had extracted evidence from the long-submerged vehicle, the Harper case became the foundation for new protocols in underwater evidence recovery. They published a comprehensive manual detailing techniques for preserving and analyzing materials that had been submerged for extended periods, a resource that was adopted by law enforcement agencies nationwide. Water is both a destroyer and a preserver of evidence, explained the lead forensic scientist who had worked on the Harper case. Understanding exactly how different materials react over time in underwater environments has transformed our approach to cases involving submerged vehicles or remains. This expertise proved valuable in other cold cases throughout the Southeast. Within 5 years of the Harper case resolution, similar techniques helped solve 3 other long-missing persons cases in Georgia and neighboring states, all involving vehicles that had been submerged in bodies of water. The bridge over the Altamaha River, renamed the Harper Memorial Bridge, became a place of both remembrance and education. A small visitor center near the bridge housed exhibits about the family and the investigation, along with information about river safety and the environmental importance of the Altamaha watershed. We wanted to create a place that honored the Harper family while also serving the community, explained the center's director. Visitors learn about the case, but they also learn about the river itself, its ecology, its history, and how to protect it for future generations. The center became an unexpected destination for law enforcement training. Police academies throughout Georgia included a visit to the site in their curriculum, with new officers standing on the bridge where the Harper family had met their end, contemplating both the tragedy and the perseverance that had eventually brought resolution. Standing here makes it real in a way that classroom instruction never could, one cadet wrote in a reflection paper. You feel the weight of what happened, but also the importance of never giving up on finding the truth, no matter how much time has passed. For Margaret Sullivan, who had waited so long for answers about her daughter's family, the years following Lawton's conviction brought a measure of peace. Though her health continued to decline, she found strength in knowing that her persistence had contributed to the case's eventual resolution. For 23 years, I refused to let the world forget Elizabeth and her family, she told a documentary filmmaker in what would be her final interview. I couldn't save them, but I could ensure they were remembered, that their case remained alive in people's minds. That's all any of us can do for those we've lost. Keep their memory alive until justice finds its way to them. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 2027, 30 years after her daughter's disappearance. Her funeral was attended not only by family and friends, but by dozens of law enforcement officers who had worked on the Harper case over the decades. Detective Lawson, by then in his 80s and using a wheelchair, insisted on attending despite his fragile health. Margaret was as much a part of solving this case as any detective, Lawson said during the service. Her refusal to let the world forget kept us all accountable. She taught me that persistence isn't just a professional virtue for investigators. It's a form of love. Following Margaret's wishes, her ashes were scattered from the Harper Memorial Bridge, joining the river that had held her family's secret for so many years. The ceremony was private, attended only by close family members and a few key figures from the investigation, including Detectives Lawson and Martinez. There was something profoundly right about it, Martinez later reflected. Margaret had spent decades looking for her family. Now she was with them again, her search finally complete. In the years that followed, the Harper case continued to influence Georgia's approach to criminal justice in unexpected ways. The story of the family's disappearance and the long road to resolution became a touchstone for discussions about persistence, technological advancement, and community responsibility. Law enforcement training programs incorporated the case as a centerpiece of cold case methodology, with particular emphasis on the importance of preserving evidence and documentation for future technological advances. What we can't solve today, tomorrow's technology might unravel, became a mantra in police academies throughout the state. The case also transformed how Georgia's criminal justice system communicated with families of victims in unsolved cases. The Harper Protocol, as it came to be known, established guidelines for regular updates to families even when no new developments had occurred, recognizing the importance of maintaining connection and demonstrating ongoing commitment. Margaret Sullivan waited 23 years for answers, explained the GBI director who implemented the protocol. During much of that time, she had no idea if anyone was still working on her family's case. No family should have to wonder if their loved ones have been forgotten by those sworn to find justice. Under the protocol, families received quarterly updates on their cases, were introduced to new personnel when investigative teams changed, and had direct access to a victim advocate who could answer questions and provide resources. While these measures couldn't accelerate the resolution of difficult cases, they provided families with transparency and respect during the often lengthy investigative process. The impact of the Harper case extended beyond Georgia's borders as well. Law enforcement agencies in neighboring states adopted similar approaches to cold case management and family communication. The case was featured in FBI training materials as an example of how seemingly dormant investigations could be revitalized through technological advances and fresh perspectives. The Harper case teaches us humility, read the introduction to the FBI training module. It reminds us that our limitations today need not be permanent obstacles to justice. What we cannot solve with current methods may yield to tomorrow's technology, particularly when evidence has been carefully preserved and documented. This perspective influenced how agencies throughout the Southeast approached cases that had reached apparent dead ends. Rather than closing such cases entirely, investigators were trained to identify and preserve elements that might respond to future technological advances, essentially creating time capsules of evidence for the next generation of forensic tools. The Harper family's story also resonated in popular culture. Beyond the documentary and books that directly chronicled the case, their experience influenced fictional portrayals of crime and justice. Television crime dramas incorporated storylines about cold cases revitalized through technological advances, often with explicit references to the Harper case as inspiration. One critically acclaimed series, 23 Years, used the Harper case as a framework for exploring how a single crime ripples through a community over decades. Each episode followed a different character whose life had been touched by the disappearance, from the original investigators to the family's neighbors to the college students whose research ultimately led to the vehicle's discovery. We wanted to show how a case like this affects not just the immediate victims and their families, but entire communities across generations, explained the show's creator. The Harper family disappearance changed countless lives in ways both obvious and subtle. Their story isn't just about a crime and its solution. It's about how we collectively carry the weight of unanswered questions. The show's nuanced approach earned praise from those who had been involved in the actual case. Detective Martinez served as a consultant, ensuring that the investigative aspects were portrayed accurately while also helping the writers capture the emotional toll that such cases take on law enforcement professionals. "They got it right," Martinez said, after viewing the series. "They showed how a case like this becomes part of who you are, how it changes how you see the world. And they captured something essential about why we never give up, even when the trail seems cold." For the residents of Savannah, who had lived through the actual events, watching fictionalized versions of their experience provoked complex emotions. Many reported that the series helped them process feelings about the case that they hadn't fully acknowledged before. "For years, we lived with this shadow over our community," explained one longtime resident who had known the Harper family. "We went about our daily lives, but there was always this unresolved question hanging in the air. Seeing it portrayed on screen, seeing characters work through similar feelings, was surprisingly healing." The series sparked renewed interest in the actual case, with tourists visiting Savannah specifically to see locations connected to the Harper family. The city's tourism board initially resisted promoting these sites, concerned about appearing to capitalize on tragedy, but eventually developed a thoughtful approach that balanced visitor interest with respect for the family's memory. "We created a guided historical tour that includes the Harper case within the broader context of Savannah's history," explained the tourism director. "It emphasizes the community's response to the tragedy and the advances in justice that resulted from it, rather than sensationalizing the crime itself." Proceeds from the tour supported both the Harper Memorial Scholarship and a fund for investigating other cold cases in Georgia, ensuring that visitor interest contributed to ongoing justice efforts rather than merely commercializing tragedy. By 2030, the Harper case had become so embedded in Georgia's cultural and legal landscape that many younger residents had never known a time when the family's fate was a mystery. For them, the case was not about disappearance, but about resolution, a story with a beginning, middle, and end, however tragic that end might be. But for those who had lived through the years of uncertainty, who had wondered about the blue Suburban and its passengers, who had seen Margaret Sullivan standing vigil year after year, the resolution brought a complicated mixture of closure and renewed grief. Finding answers doesn't erase the pain, reflected Elizabeth's closest friend during a memorial service on the 30th anniversary of the disappearance. It just transforms it from the pain of not knowing to the pain of knowing exactly what happened. Both are difficult to bear, but there is a certain peace in truth, however harsh it might be. That sentiment was echoed by many connected to the case. Detective Lawson, in the final interview before his death in 2031, spoke of how the Harper case had shaped his understanding of justice and closure. People sometimes talk about closure as if it's a finish line you cross, and then everything is settled, he said, his voice weakened by age, but his eyes still sharp. But that's not how it works with cases like this. Resolution doesn't end the story. It just allows the story to be told honestly, with all its pain and truth intact. For the community of Savannah, the honest telling of the Harper family's story became part of the city's identity. The case was incorporated into historical tours alongside older events, recognized as a pivotal moment in the city's modern history that had transformed how the community understood itself and its responsibilities. Every community has its defining stories, explained a local historian. For Savannah, the Harper case became one of ours, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because of how we responded to it over decades. It tested our commitment to remembering, to seeking truth, to supporting those who waited for answers. That commitment was visibly demonstrated each June when the annual Harper Memorial Run took participants from the family's former home on Magnolia Avenue to the bridge where their vehicle had been found. The event, which grew from a few dozen participants in its first year to several thousand by its 10th anniversary, raised funds for cold case investigations while physically connecting the points of the Harper family's final journey. There's something powerful about physically tracing their route, said one participant, a young woman who hadn't been born when the Harpers disappeared. It makes their story tangible, helps us understand both the geographical and emotional landscape of what happened. The run culminated at the Harper Memorial Bridge, where participants placed white flowers in the river, while a simple ceremony honored not just the Harper family, but all victims of unsolved crimes. The event drew participants from across the state, many of whom had their own connections to unsolved cases and found solidarity in the shared experience. For the law enforcement community, the annual gathering provided a powerful reminder of why cold cases matter, why persistence is essential even when immediate results seem unlikely. Officers who had worked on the Harper case over the decades often attended, watching as new generations committed themselves to the principles of justice that had eventually brought resolution to the family. Standing at that bridge, surrounded by thousands of people, you feel the weight of responsibility, said one young GBI agent attending the memorial run for the first time. But you also feel supported by a community that understands and values the work, even when it takes decades to reach resolution. That sense of shared commitment extended beyond the annual event into daily practices. The GBI's Cold Case Unit, established in the wake of the Harper case, continued to resolve long-dormant investigations, bringing answers to families who had waited years or decades for truth. The Harper case taught us that time can be both an obstacle and an ally, explained the unit's director. Technology advances, new witnesses come forward, perspectives shift. Our job is to preserve the essential elements of each case so that when the moment for resolution arrives, we're ready to recognize and seize it. This philosophy proved effective beyond Georgia's borders. Law enforcement agencies throughout the Southeast adopted similar approaches, leading to the resolution of dozens of cold cases in the region. Each solution reinforced the lesson of the Harper case, that persistence matters, that evidence preserved today might yield answers tomorrow, that justice delayed need not be justice denied. For the environmental science students whose research had inadvertently led to the discovery of the Harper family's vehicle, the case's legacy influenced their professional paths in profound ways. All four pursued careers that combined scientific research with public service, carrying forward the lesson that knowledge has responsibilities beyond academic publication. Lisa Chen, who had first recognized the vehicle shape on the sonar display, became a leading developer of technology for underwater search and recovery operations. Her systems, designed specifically for locating submerged vehicles and evidence, were adopted by law enforcement agencies nationwide. The tools we develop aren't just for environmental research anymore, Chen explained during a technology conference. They're now part of a continuum of justice that spans from the initial investigation to resolution decades later. Each advance we make in imaging or detection might be the key that unlocks a case someone has waited years to solve. Her work embodied the unexpected connection between scientific advancement and justice that had defined the Harper case. The technology she developed specifically addressed the challenges that had made the Suburban so difficult to find: murky water, silt accumulation, and the tendency of metal to degrade in underwater environments. We design with cold cases in mind, Chen explained. How will this equipment perform not just in ideal conditions, but in the difficult, murky, complex environments where answers have remained hidden for years? This approach led to breakthroughs that extended beyond law enforcement applications. Chen's imaging systems were adopted by environmental cleanup organizations to locate underwater pollution sources, by archaeological teams studying submerged historical sites, and by infrastructure inspectors assessing the condition of underwater bridge foundations. The Harper case taught me that technology developed for one purpose often finds unexpected applications, Chen reflected. What began as environmental research became a tool for justice, which in turn evolved into technologies that serve multiple aspects of society. Adin, her fellow research team members, found similarly impactful careers. The group's hydrologist developed models for understanding how objects move in river currents, helping investigators predict where evidence might travel after entering waterways. Their geologists specialized in dating sediment deposits, providing crucial timeline information for underwater crime scenes. Their computer scientists created software that enhanced sonar imaging, making it possible to identify submerged objects with unprecedented clarity. Together, they founded the Altamaha Institute, a research center dedicated to advancing underwater search and recovery techniques. The institute, located near the Harper Memorial Bridge, served as both a technology development hub and a training facility for law enforcement divers from across the country. We're creating tools and knowledge that simply didn't exist when the Harper family disappeared, explained the Institute's director. Every advance reduces the chance that another family will wait decades for answers that could have been found sooner with better technology. The Institute maintained a close relationship with the GBI's cold case unit, providing technical support for underwater investigations throughout Georgia. This partnership led to the resolution of several long-dormant cases, each success reinforcing the lessons of the Harper investigation, that technology, persistence, and cross-disciplinary collaboration could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles to justice. For the legal system, the Harper case provided valuable precedent for prosecuting cold cases where physical evidence had been compromised by environmental exposure. The successful conviction of Michael Lawton demonstrated that such cases could be won, despite the challenges of degraded evidence, establishing a model for prosecutors facing similar situations. Before the Harper case, there was a tendency to view long-submerged evidence as too compromised to build a strong case, explained a prosecutor who had studied the trial extensively. But the Lawton conviction showed that with proper forensic work and corroborating testimony, even evidence that spent decades underwater can lead to successful prosecution. Law schools throughout the Southeast incorporated the case into their curriculum, using it to teach students about the unique challenges and opportunities presented by cold case prosecution. The legal strategies that had successfully countered Lawton's various defenses became a template for handling similar cases. The Harper case established that the passage of time need not be an insurmountable barrier to justice, noted a legal scholar who specialized in cold case jurisprudence. The prosecution team created a playbook for how to build a compelling case despite the challenges of degraded evidence and faded memories. Indeed, this precedent proved particularly valuable as advances in forensic technology led to breakthroughs in other dormant cases. Prosecutors faced with building cases on evidence that had spent years or decades in challenging environmental conditions looked to the Harper trial for guidance. We reference the Harper case in almost every cold case prosecution we pursue, explained a district attorney in coastal South Carolina. It established that juries can and will convict based on evidence that has been affected by time and environmental exposure, as long as the scientific analysis is sound and the chain of reasoning is clear. The impact extended to judicial practice as well. Judges who had observed the Harper trial's careful handling of complex forensic evidence incorporated those lessons into their own courtrooms, ensuring that scientific testimony was presented in ways that juries could understand and evaluate properly. The Harper case demonstrated how crucial it is for scientific evidence to be accessible to jurors, noted a Superior Court judge who had studied the trial proceedings. It's not enough for the science to be sound. It must also be presented in a way that enables jurors to understand its significance and limitations. This emphasis on clarity and accessibility became a hallmark of cold case prosecutions throughout the region. Prosecutors and expert witnesses developed techniques for explaining complex forensic concepts to jurors, ensuring that technological advances translated effectively into courtroom contexts. For the broader criminal justice system, the Harper case highlighted both the potential and the limitations of cold case investigations. It demonstrated that persistence and technological advancement could eventually yield justice, while also revealing the emotional and resource costs of such prolonged investigations. "We have to be honest about the toll these cases take," reflected a GBI administrator who had overseen the final phase of the Harper investigation. "The decades of uncertainty exact a price from the victims' families, from the communities affected, and from the investigators themselves. Justice delayed comes at a cost, even when it eventually arrives." This recognition led to changes in how resources were allocated to missing persons cases, particularly those involving families. The Harper Protocol emphasized immediate, comprehensive response to such disappearances, recognizing that early, intensive investigation might prevent the need for decades of follow-up. "We learned from the Harper case that what isn't done in the first days and weeks may take decades to rectify," explained a law enforcement trainer who taught the protocol to new officers. "The resources we commit up front are an investment in timely justice, in preventing families from enduring what Margaret Sullivan experienced for 23 years. For the community of Savannah, the Harper case's resolution brought a complex mixture of closure and renewed grief. The neighborhood where the family had lived, once shadowed by their unexplained absence, gradually reclaimed a sense of normalcy while still honoring their memory. The annual candlelight vigil that Margaret Sullivan had maintained for decades transformed after her death into a community celebration of persistence and memory. Residents gathered not just to remember the Harper family, but to recognize the importance of never forgetting, of carrying forward the stories of those who could no longer speak for themselves. "Margaret taught us that remembering is an act of resistance against injustice," said one longtime neighbor during the 30th anniversary gathering. She refused to let her family fade from memory, and in doing so, she kept the possibility of justice alive until technology and circumstance finally aligned to provide answers. This lesson extended beyond the Harper case to other unsolved disappearances and murders in Georgia. Families who had experienced similar losses found inspiration in Margaret's persistence, forming support networks and advocacy groups that kept their loved ones' cases in the public consciousness. The Harper case showed us that no matter how cold a trail might seem, there's always hope for resolution, explained the founder of Georgia Families for Justice, an organization that supported relatives of missing and murdered persons. Margaret Sullivan's unwavering commitment to her family's memory became a model for how we approach our own losses. With persistence, with hope, and with the understanding that justice may take time, but is always worth pursuing. For the law enforcement officers who had worked on the case over its 23-year span, the resolution brought both professional satisfaction and profound reflection. Many spoke of how the Harper investigation had shaped their understanding of their work and its meaning. Cases like this remind us why we do what we do, said one retired detective who had been involved in the early search for the family. Not for quick wins or simple solutions, but for the long arc of justice that sometimes spans decades. We may not always see the resolution during our careers, but our work contributes to a process that eventually provides answers. This perspective influenced how senior officers mentored younger colleagues, emphasizing the importance of thorough documentation and evidence preservation, even in cases that seemed unlikely to be solved immediately. The Harper case became a touchstone for discussions about professional legacy and the often invisible connections between officers separated by decades. What you document today may be the key that unlocks a case 20 years from now, became a common refrain in police academies throughout Georgia. Your attention to detail might provide answers to questions that haven't even been asked yet. For Detective Martinez, who had overseen the final phase of the investigation, the Harper case defined his career in unexpected ways. Though he went on to solve many other cases, none had the same profound impact on his understanding of justice and its time frame. The Harper case taught me patience, Martinez explained in a commencement address to a graduating class of GBI agents. Not the passive patience of waiting and hoping, but the active patience of maintaining vigilance, of preserving evidence, of keeping faith with victims and their families across years or even decades. This concept of active patience became central to how cold case units throughout the Southeast approached their work. Rather than viewing time as an enemy that eroded evidence and memories, they recognized it could also be an ally that brought new technologies, fresh perspectives, and unexpected connections. Time changes the landscape of an investigation, Martinez often told new agents. What was impossible to detect yesterday may be clearly visible tomorrow. Our job is to preserve the scene as completely as possible so that future investigators have everything they need when technology finally catches up. This philosophy led to innovations in evidence storage and documentation. The GBI developed protocols specifically for preserving materials that might benefit from future technological advances, creating what amounted to time capsules of evidence awaiting tools that did not yet exist. We now approach cold cases with a dual time frame, explained a GBI evidence specialist. We do everything possible with current technology while simultaneously preparing the evidence for analysis techniques that may be developed 5, 10, or 20 years in the future. The impact of this approach extended far beyond Georgia. Law enforcement agencies throughout the country studied the Harper case resolution as a model for how technological advances could breathe new life into dormant investigations. The case was featured in FBI training materials as an example of how seemingly impossible cases could eventually yield to persistence and innovation. The Harper case demonstrates that unsolvable is often just a temporary designation, read the introduction to the FBI training module. What cannot be resolved today may be crystal clear tomorrow with the right technological advances and investigative approach. For the scientific community, the case highlighted the unexpected ways in which research could serve justice. Academic programs in forensic science, environmental studies, and computer imaging analysis incorporated the Harper investigation into their curriculum, emphasizing how cross-disciplinary knowledge could lead to breakthroughs in seemingly unrelated fields. The environmental science students who found the Harper vehicle weren't looking for a missing family, noted a professor who taught a course on forensic applications of environmental research. They were studying river pollution, but because they recognized the significance of what their equipment detected, they became crucial links in a chain of justice that spanned more than 2 decades. This recognition led to increased collaboration between academic research programs and law enforcement agencies. Universities throughout Georgia established formal channels for sharing potentially relevant scientific findings, ensuring that discoveries made in research contexts could benefit ongoing investigations when appropriate. The Harper case taught us that the walls between academic research and practical application need to be permeable, explained the president of Georgia Southern University during a symposium on science and justice. Knowledge gained in one context often has unexpected value in another, but only if we create pathways for that knowledge to flow freely. These pathways took various forms, from formal consultation agreements between university departments and law enforcement agencies to grant programs that funded research with potential forensic applications. The boundaries between pure research and applied science became increasingly fluid, particularly in fields related to environmental monitoring and imaging technology. For the media that had covered the Harper case through its various phases, the resolution provided an opportunity to reflect on the role of journalism in maintaining public awareness of unsolved cases. Many news organizations in Georgia developed specific protocols for revisiting cold cases on anniversaries or when new investigative approaches became available. The Harper case showed us that media attention is more than just reporting. It's a form of accountability, explained a veteran crime reporter. By keeping these stories in the public consciousness, we help ensure that they're not forgotten by those with the power to pursue justice. This philosophy led to the creation of dedicated cold case reporting teams at several major news outlets in the Southeast. These journalists specialized in researching and revisiting unsolved crimes, often applying investigative techniques that complemented official law enforcement efforts. "We're not trying to replace police work," emphasized the editor of one such team. "But we can sometimes ask questions from different angles, connect dots that might not be obvious within the constraints of an official investigation, and most importantly, keep public attention focused on cases that deserve resolution." The impact of this dedicated coverage extended beyond individual cases to broader systemic issues. Patterns identified through cold case reporting led to investigations of disparities in how missing persons cases were handled based on race, socioeconomic status, and geography. When we look at which cases remain unsolved for decades, we see troubling patterns, noted an investigative journalist who had studied the aftermath of the Harper case. The Harper family received significant attention because they fit a certain profile: middle class, respected in their community, connected to institutions with influence. Not every missing family receives the same resources or persistence. This recognition led to advocacy for more equitable distribution of investigative resources, particularly for missing persons cases involving marginalized communities. Organizations inspired by the Harper case resolution lobbied for protocols that would ensure consistent, thorough response, regardless of a victim's background or connections. The Harper case taught us what's possible when a community refuses to forget, explained an advocate for missing persons from underserved areas. Now we're working to ensure that every family receives that same commitment, that same persistence, that same refusal to let time erase the search for answers. For those directly connected to the Harper family, their friends, colleagues, And the children who would have grown up alongside James and Sarah. The case's resolution brought a complicated mixture of validation and renewed grief. Many spoke of how the uncertainty had shaped their lives, influencing their understanding of safety, justice, and the fragility of normal life. For 23 years, every time I drove across a bridge over water, I thought of them, said one woman who had been Elizabeth Harper's closest friend. I wondered if they were below, if someone would ever find them. Now I know the answer, but that knowledge comes with its own kind of pain. Parents who had raised children in the Harper's neighborhood spoke of how the family's disappearance had transformed their approach to parenting, making them simultaneously more protective and more aware of the importance of living fully despite uncertainty. We couldn't keep our children in bubbles, even though the Harper case made us want to, explained one father whose son had been James Harper's best friend. Instead, we had to teach them about both caution and courage, about being aware of danger without being paralyzed by fear. These children, now adults with families of their own, carried the Harper story forward in their professional and personal lives. Many chose careers in fields related to justice, safety, or advocacy, becoming police officers, social workers, attorneys, or victim advocates. Others expressed the impact through art, literature, or community service. The Harper family's story became part of our own stories, reflected a woman who had been 11 years old when her neighbors disappeared. Their absence shaped how we understood the world and our place in it. Now, with answers finally available, we're learning how to incorporate those truths into the narratives that have guided our lives for so long. For Michael Lawton, the man whose financial desperation and callous disregard for human life had caused the tragedy, the years following his conviction brought increasing isolation. His appeals exhausted, his freedom permanently revoked, he retreated into silence, refusing interview requests and limiting contact even with his legal representatives. Prison records indicated that he rarely received visitors and participated minimally in available programs or activities. Guards described him as a solitary figure who spoke little and seemed to exist in a world of his own making, neither expressing remorse nor attempting to justify his actions. In 2032, 15 years after the Suburban was recovered from the Altamaha River, Lawton died of natural causes in the state penitentiary medical ward. The news received brief mention in Georgia media, a footnote to the story that had captivated the state for decades. His death prompted reflection on the nature of justice and its limitations. While Lawton had been held accountable through the legal system, no punishment could restore the Harper family or repair the damage caused by their loss. The resolution, while significant, could never be complete. Justice in cases like this is always imperfect, noted a victim advocate who had worked closely with Margaret Sullivan. We can identify the responsible party, we can impose legal consequences, but we can't undo the harm or fill the void left by those who were taken. That's the painful truth at the heart of every solved cold case. This recognition led to increased emphasis on both prevention and commemoration. Law enforcement and community organizations developed programs aimed at identifying potentially violent situations before they escalated, particularly those involving financial disputes or threats that might seem minor but could lead to devastating consequences. At the same time, efforts to honor the Harper family's memory expanded beyond Savannah to communities throughout Georgia. Schools, parks, and public buildings incorporated elements that served as subtle reminders of the family and the importance of persistence in seeking justice. The Richard Harper Memorial Library opened in 2035, featuring architectural elements that reflected his design philosophy and housing a special collection of books on topics that had been important to the family. Elizabeth's passion for literature was honored through a scholarship program for aspiring teachers, while dedicated spaces within the building celebrated James's artistic talent and Sarah's love of science. The library became not just a memorial, but a living institution that embodied the family's values and interests. Community programs encouraged intergenerational reading, creative expression, and scientific exploration. Activities that the Harpers had enjoyed together during their too brief time as a family. We wanted to create a space that honored not just their memory, but their potential, explained the library's founding director. This building represents not only what was lost, but what continues to thrive through the community's commitment to the values they embodied. For Detective Martinez, who had overseen the final phase of the investigation, the library's opening represented a fitting culmination to a case that had defined his career. Approaching retirement, he attended the dedication ceremony with a sense of both accomplishment and humility. The Harper case taught me that justice is a relay race, not a sprint, he reflected during his brief remarks at the ceremony. No single investigator solves a case like this. We pass the baton from one generation to the next, each contributing what we can until the final runner crosses the finish line. That perspective resonated with the young officers who had entered law enforcement after the case's resolution. Many cited the Harper investigation as an inspiration for their career choice, drawn to a profession that valued persistence and collaboration across years or even decades. "I grew up with the Harper story," explained one new GBI agent who had been a child when the Suburban was recovered. "It showed me that what matters isn't quick answers or dramatic breakthroughs, but the commitment to keep searching, keep questioning, keep believing that the truth can eventually be found." This understanding that justice often depends on connections between people separated by time and circumstance became central to how Georgia's law enforcement community viewed its responsibility to both the past and the future. Each new officer was taught to see themselves as part of a continuum that stretched both backward and forward, connecting those who had begun investigations decades earlier with those who might eventually bring them to resolution. The Harper case isn't just Georgia's most famous cold case resolution, a police academy instructor often told new recruits. It's a reminder that what you document today, what you preserve and protect and pass forward, may be the key that unlocks justice decades from now, long after your own career has ended. This awareness transformed how officers approached even routine aspects of their work. Documentation became more thorough, evidence preservation more careful, the recording of seemingly minor details more consistent, all with the understanding that information considered insignificant today might prove crucial in investigations not yet imagined. For the broader community of Savannah and beyond, the Harper case's journey from mystery to resolution became a powerful metaphor for hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The story was referenced in contexts ranging from political speeches to church sermons, its central message of persistence resonating far beyond the specifics of the case itself. When we face problems that seem beyond solution, when justice seems eternally delayed, when truth appears permanently obscured, the Harper case reminds us to maintain what I call stubborn hope, explained a community leader during a city address. Not blind optimism that ignores reality, but the determined belief that persistence matters, that small actions accumulate, that what seems impossible today may yield to tomorrow's efforts. This concept of stubborn hope became particularly meaningful in the context of other social and environmental challenges facing the region. Climate advocacy groups, social justice organizations, and educational reform movements all found inspiration in the Harper case's demonstration that long-term, persistent effort could eventually overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The Harper family waited 23 years for justice, noted an environmental advocate working to address pollution in the Altamaha River. Some of our efforts may take just as long to show results, but their story reminds us that giving up guarantees failure, while persistence keeps alive the possibility of eventually succeeding. As the 40-year mark approached since that June day, when the Harper family had set out on their vacation, never to return, Georgia's relationship with their story continued to evolve. What had begun as a shocking disappearance transformed into a haunting mystery and finally emerged as a solved case now took on the quality of a modern parable, a story that carried meaning beyond its specific circumstances. For those who had known the Harpers personally, the story remained intensely personal, a wound that had healed but left permanent scars. For younger generations who had never known a time when the case was unsolved, it offered lessons about justice, persistence, and the sometimes hidden connections between seemingly unrelated fields of knowledge. The Harper case belongs to all of us now, reflected a historian documenting Georgia's approach to cold case investigations. Not just to those who knew them or worked to find them, but to everyone who understands that justice often depends on refusing to forget, refusing to accept that some questions must remain forever unanswered. This refusal, this stubborn insistence that truth matters and is worth pursuing even when decades pass without resolution, became the Harper family's most enduring legacy. Their story, tragic though it was, demonstrated that persistence could eventually overcome even the most carefully concealed crimes, that technology could bridge gaps that once seemed unbridgeable, that a community's commitment to memory could sustain the search for answers across generations. Justice delayed is not justice denied, Margaret Sullivan had often said during her years of vigilant waiting. It's justice that requires our patience, our persistence, our refusal to forget. In that spirit, Georgia continued to pursue resolution for other families still waiting for answers, carrying forward the lessons of a case that had demonstrated, in the most compelling way possible, that no truth remains permanently hidden when sufficient determination, technology, and time are brought to bear on its discovery. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.